The wind howled through the high-altitude valley, carving through the skeletal pines that clung to the rock face. Dr. Mark Hastings adjusted his pack and stared up at the looming peaks above, their jagged silhouettes black against the overcast sky. Snow lingered in patches along the ridges, though the valley itself was eerily bare. Just rock, wind, and silence. He had spent years in the field, mapping geological anomalies, but nothing had ever unsettled him quite like this place. "Christ, it's colder than I expected," muttered Nathan Carter, stomping his boots against the frozen earth. The lead engineer wiped his gloved hands together and glanced at the others. "You sure this is the right spot?" Mark pulled a handheld GPS from his jacket. The coordinates blinked steadily on the screen. "This is where Zyros told us to set up. The seismic data confirms it. Something unnatural is buried beneath this mountain. Something deep." A dozen feet away, Dr. Elena Vesquez crouched beside a boulder, brushing her fingers over an unusual cluster of moss. "It's thriving in temperatures it shouldn't be able to survive," she murmured. "It's almost bioluminescent." Jonah McBride, their documentarian, knelt beside her, angling his camera for a shot. "Perfect. Let's get some footage of this. Maybe we'll go viral before we even find the alien base." "Don't call it that," Sam Richter interjected, voice sharp. The security specialist, a former Marine, had been silent most of the hike. "We don't know what we're dealing with." "Fine," Jonah said, smirking. "The mysterious underground structure that totally isn't an alien base." Mark sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Let's focus. We set up camp here. First thing in the morning, we drill." They worked quickly, pitching tents and assembling equipment under the watchful eye of the encroaching peaks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature dropped sharply. A sense of isolation settled over the group. Out here, surrounded by endless wilderness, they might as well have been the last people on Earth. Dinner was a quiet affair, huddled around a small propane heater. Jonah played back some of the footage he'd taken that day, his camera screen flickering in the dim light. The moss, the strange rock formations, the sweeping view of the valley. Everything looked ordinary, yet something felt off. "Did anyone hear that?" Elena asked suddenly. The group froze. "Hear what?" Mark asked. She hesitated. "I thought I heard a voice." They listened. Only the wind answered. Sam exhaled and poked at the heater's flame. "It's the wind cutting through the rocks. Makes all kinds of sounds." No one argued, but an uneasy silence followed. That night, Mark slept fitfully. The wind outside battered the tents, and every so often, he swore he heard something underneath it, a sound too deep, too deliberate to be the natural groaning of the mountains. A whisper, just at the edge of hearing. It was almost a relief when dawn broke. The drill roared to life as Carter positioned the bit against the exposed rock face. The seismic scans from Zyros had shown a hollow space beneath them, but no one knew how deep it went or what was inside. Mark watched intently as the drill bit carved into the stone. Elena crouched beside him, running more scans. "The material here is strange," she said, frowning at her tablet. "It's giving off an odd electromagnetic signature." Carter grunted. "We're getting through, but it's tough as hell. Almost like drilling into metal." For an hour, they worked. Then, without warning, the drill lurched violently to the side, wrenching from Carter's grip. "What the hell?" A deafening crack echoed through the valley. A deep fracture split across the rock face, revealing something beneath. Something smooth, something metallic. Everyone fell silent. The exposed surface was black and seamless, embedded in the mountainside as if the stone had grown around it. It reflected no light. Jonah moved first, lifting his camera. "Holy shit," he whispered. Mark stepped forward and ran a gloved hand over the surface. It was cold, unnaturally so. Even through his gloves, it sent a shiver up his arm. "This isn't natural." "No seams," Carter murmured. "No bolts. It's like the whole thing is one solid piece." "It's a door," Sam said grimly. Mark swallowed. It did feel like a door, but a door to what? Elena aimed a scanner at the surface. Her brow furrowed. "There's something behind it. A massive open space." Jonah kept filming, stepping closer. Think we can get inside? Before anyone could answer, a low hum filled the air. A vibration, deep and resonant, thrummed through the ground beneath them. The drill, the scanners, every piece of equipment flickered and shorted out. The hum grew louder. Then the door opened. No one touched it. No one activated anything. It simply slid open. Beyond it lay darkness. A thick, unnatural black that swallowed the light from their flashlights. The air pouring from within was stale, heavy with the scent of earth, and something else. Something metallic, almost organic. Jonah took a cautious step forward, camera raised. "Wait," Sam ordered, gripping his shoulder. Jonah turned, his face pale but exhilarated. "This is history, man. We can't stop now." Mark exchanged a look with Elena. She was breathing hard, her fingers clenched around her scanner. "This is wrong," she whispered. Carter ran a hand through his hair. "We shouldn't go in," but the door was already open, and the darkness was waiting. Mark took a deep breath. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped inside. Mark Hastings stepped over the threshold, and the world behind him ceased to exist. The darkness inside the structure was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was oppressive, thick, as though the air itself was swallowing their flashlights. His own breathing felt too loud, each inhale brittle against the overwhelming silence. Behind him, the others hesitated at the entrance. Then one by one, they followed. Jonah's camera light flickered as he panned across the interior. "This is massive," he whispered, his voice small against the cavernous space. The beam of his light barely penetrated the gloom, illuminating glimpses of impossibly smooth black walls. They arched high above them, curving in ways that made no architectural sense. "This isn't a cave," Carter murmured, running a gloved hand along the surface. "This is constructed, engineered, but by who?" Elena's voice was hushed, reverent, tinged with unease. Mark adjusted his grip on his flashlight. "Let's find out." They moved deeper inside, their footsteps eerily muted against the metal floor. The air had a stagnant quality, thick with the scent of something ancient. Stone, dust, and a faint metallic tang, like blood. Sam took the lead, his hand resting near the firearm strapped to his chest. "Stay close. If anyone feels off, we turn back." No one argued. The passage stretched forward, spiraling downward at an almost imperceptible angle. Their flashlights revealed faint etchings along the walls, symbols unlike any language Mark had ever seen. They weren't carved or painted. They seemed to pulse, shifting subtly whenever he looked away. Elena knelt to examine them. "These markings, they're alive." Jonah adjusted his camera. "That's not possible. I'm telling you, they're moving," she insisted. "Like they're reacting to us?" Mark felt it too, a faint awareness like the walls were watching. Then came the sound, a distant, rhythmic thrum, so deep it vibrated through their bones. Jonah cursed under his breath. "Tell me someone else heard that." The sound came again, closer. Mark tightened his grip on his flashlight. "Keep moving." The further they descended, the stranger the architecture became. The walls narrowed, then widened without symmetry. Shadows played tricks, stretching unnaturally, bending at angles that didn't align with their movements. Elena's breathing grew shallow. "I don't like this." Jonah exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well, too late now." Mark could feel the shift in the air, a change so subtle it took him a moment to place it. The silence had deepened. Then Jonah screamed. Mark spun, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. Jonah was still standing, but his eyes were wide, staring down the corridor ahead. There was something there, Jonah stammered, backing away. "I swear to God, I saw." A flicker of movement, a shadow shifting, not cast by their lights, but moving independently. The air turned electric, buzzing with unseen energy. Sam raised his rifle. "We're leaving?" Then Jonah's camera glitched, static flickering across the screen. The faint light from his LCD display pulsed erratically, and for half a second, an image froze on the screen. A figure, tall, skeletal, watching. Then the screen cut to black. Jonah dropped the camera, shaking. "What the fuck was that?" Mark's pulse thundered in his ears. His instincts screamed at him to run, but something deeper, a terrible curiosity, kept him rooted in place. "We need to go," Sam repeated. But before they could move, a new sound filled the chamber. A whisper, not a voice, but something deeper, more insidious, a sound that crawled directly into their skulls. Mark clutched his head, nausea roiling through him. The whisper wasn't in any language he recognized, but it carried meaning. "You should not be here." Then the walls began to pulse. Jonah staggered back, his face pale, sweat slicking his forehead. "We need to run." The whisper grew louder. Then Jonah screamed again. But this time, it wasn't in terror. It was in pain. He clutched his chest, gasping. His body convulsed, his spine arching unnaturally. His skin darkened, veins turning black, spreading like ink beneath his flesh. "Elena!" Mark shouted. "Help him!" She scrambled to his side. But the moment she touched him, she reeled back, her hands smoking as though burned. Jonah's eyes rolled back. His body jerked once, twice, then stopped. Silence. Then he moved. Not Jonah. Not anymore. The thing that had been Jonah turned its head toward them, eyes hollow, mouth stretching into something too wide, too wrong. Then it lunged. Sam fired. The gunshot echoed through the chamber. Jonah, or what was left of him, collapsed, twitching, dark liquid seeping from the wound. It wasn't blood. It was black, viscous, absorbing the light. The whispering stopped. Then the corridor behind them shifted. The way they came was gone. The structure was alive, and it wasn't letting them leave. Carter grabbed Mark's arm, shaking him. "What the hell do we do?" Mark's mind raced. They couldn't go back. The only way was forward. "We keep moving," he said. Elena was still staring at Jonah's body, her hands trembling. "That wasn't natural," she whispered. "That thing inside him." Sam reloaded his rifle, jaw tight. "It's dead now." Mark wasn't so sure. The chamber trembled. The symbols along the walls pulsed faster, brighter. The entire structure felt aware now, as if their presence had woken something. Elena's scanner beeped erratically. "Something huge is ahead of us." Mark exchanged a look with Carter. "Bigger than this?" She swallowed. "Much bigger." They pressed on. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost to darkness. At its center stood a monolithic structure, a towering obelisk of the same black metal floating above the ground. It pulsed with an unseen rhythm, each vibration thrumming through Mark's skull. "This is it," Carter whispered. "This is what we were sent to find." Elena took a cautious step forward, eyes locked on the obelisk. "It's not just a structure," she breathed. "It's something more." Then, as if in response, the whisper returned. "We have waited." Mark staggered, vision blurring. The air grew heavier, thicker, pressing against him like an invisible weight. Elena reached out, her fingers grazing the obelisk's surface. A sound like cracking stone filled the air. The obelisk split open. Inside, something stirred, and then the screaming began. The obelisk split open with a sound like grinding stone, its blackened surface peeling apart in jagged, unnatural layers. From within, something moved. Mark staggered back, shielding his eyes as a wave of frigid air burst from the fissure. It carried a scent unlike anything he had ever encountered. Earthy, metallic, and something deeper, something wrong. Elena was still frozen in place, her fingertips inches from the shifting monolith. Her body trembled, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Then the whisper returned. "You have come too soon." Mark clenched his jaw as the words slithered through his skull, bypassing his ears entirely. The space around them darkened, as if the very air had thickened into an unnatural void. The chamber pulsed in response to the obelisk's awakening, the walls vibrating in time with some unseen force. Then the thing inside the monolith stepped forward. At first, it was a silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated beyond human proportions. Its skin was the same black, lightless material as the structure itself, shifting like liquid shadow. But it had eyes, not glowing, not reflecting light, just holes where eyes should have been, blacker than the surrounding darkness. And it was watching them, Elena let out a sharp gasp, staggering backward. Sam raised his rifle. "Don't!" The whisper pulsed again, stronger this time. "There is no escape." Then it moved. Not like a person, not like anything Mark had ever seen. It flickered. One moment standing at the monolith, the next a dozen feet closer. Then closer still. Carter cursed, scrambling back. "Move!" The team scattered as the thing advanced. Jonah's lifeless body twitched where it had fallen, as if responding to the entity's presence. Sam fired. The gunshot roared through the chamber, but the bullet never reached its target. The moment it entered the space around the entity, it vanished, as though reality itself had swallowed it whole. "Fuck," Sam hissed. Then the creature spoke. Not through whispers, not through words, through thought. It poured into Mark's mind like liquid ice, drowning his own thoughts beneath its presence. "You will carry us." Mark fell to his knees, clutching his head. The pressure was unbearable, an unseen weight crushing his mind from the inside. The entity's presence wasn't just communication, it was invasion. And then it spread. Elena screamed. She clutched at her temples, her face contorted in agony. Carter collapsed beside her, writhing as if something were burrowing beneath his skin. Sam grabbed Mark's arm, dragging him upright. "We need to move. Now." The thing was closer. Its limbs stretched and shifted as though it were reshaping itself, its form flickering in and out of focus. Jonah's body twitched again, then rose. His head lolled unnaturally, eyes black voids that mirrored the creature's own. His lips parted, but the voice that emerged was not his. "We are many. We are hunger." Jonah's mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, his jaw cracking as though unhinged. His fingers spasmed, twisting, lengthening into something inhuman. Then he lunged. Mark barely had time to react before Sam shoved him aside and fired again. This time, the bullet hit, but it didn't slow Jonah down. The wound darkened, then sealed itself, as if the body was nothing more than a shell. Carter, still convulsing, let out a strangled sob. His skin was changing, black veins spiderwebbing beneath the surface, his eyes flickering with something not his own. "Go!" Sam bellowed, grabbing Elena and hauling her to her feet. Mark didn't hesitate. They ran. The corridors had changed. The path they had taken down was gone, replaced by twisting, organic-looking tunnels that shifted as they moved. The walls pulsed with a sickly rhythm, like a living thing deciding whether to crush them or let them pass. Elena staggered beside Mark, gasping for breath. "Carter!" Mark didn't respond. He couldn't. They had lost him. Behind them, the whispers grew louder, folding in on each other, forming words in a language that didn't belong in human mouths. Sam led them through the twisting tunnels, his grip on his rifle tight, knuckles white. "We need to find another way out." But Mark already knew the truth. There was no way out. The moment they had stepped inside, they had become part of this place. And it wasn't finished with them. The tunnels opened into another vast chamber. But this one was different. A pit yawned at its center, stretching downward into an abyss that pulsed with dim, violet light. The air vibrated with something alive. Mark skidded to a halt. "What is this?" Elena's scanner flickered wildly in her hands, unreadable symbols scrolling across the screen. "It's powerful." Sam didn't lower his weapon. "We're not sticking around to find out." But the whispers had them now. They filled the room, growing louder, resonating in Mark's bones. The light from the abyss flared, and the entity's form began to materialize again, rising from the depths as though being born anew. Sam fired, but this time the bullets reversed. The moment they left the barrel, they stopped, hovered in midair, then turned. The gun exploded in Sam's hands, throwing him backward. He hit the ground hard, his body convulsing as dark tendrils lashed out from the pit, wrapping around his limbs. "No!" Elena lunged, grabbing his arm, but the tendrils coiled tighter, pulling him downward. Sam locked eyes with Mark. "Don't!" Then he was gone. The abyss swallowed him whole. Elena sobbed, her hands smeared with something dark, something alive. Mark clenched his fists. "We have to destroy it." She turned to him, eyes wild. "How?" The whispers laughed. Then the pit began to rise. Mark barely had time to react before the entire chamber shifted. The abyss was no longer below them. It was above, stretching outward like a massive, living maw. The entity had been waiting, and now it was awake. Elena grabbed Mark's arm. "We can't fight this." Mark's mind raced. No, they couldn't fight it, but maybe they could trap it. He scanned the room, the walls pulsing with energy, the symbols shifting, rewriting themselves. They weren't just decoration. They were controls. "Elena, help me," he ordered, stepping toward the nearest wall. She hesitated, but then understanding flickered in her expression. She raised her scanner, deciphering the patterns. This place isn't just a tomb. It's a prison." Mark pressed his palm against the nearest symbol. It burned beneath his touch, responding. The abyss shrieked. The tendrils lashed out, reaching for them. But Elena worked fast, recalibrating the scanner, activating symbols in rapid succession. The chamber trembled. The pit began to close. The whispers turned to screams. Mark didn't stop. He pressed another glyph, then another, until the structure itself fought back. The entity lashed out one last time, darkness engulfing them. And then, silence. The chamber was still. The abyss was gone. Mark collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged. Elena dropped beside him, trembling. "Did we?" The symbols dimmed. The whispers faded. And the door behind them opened. The newly opened doorway yawned before them, a passage bathed in cold, sterile light. It was nothing like the twisting, pulsating tunnels they had fought through. This corridor was rigid, metallic, lined with dark panels that hummed with unseen energy. Mark struggled to his feet, his body aching from the desperate battle to seal the abyss. Elena was beside him, her face pale, streaked with sweat. "We have to go," she whispered. Neither of them questioned whether the door had opened as a reward or a warning. They had no choice but to step through. Behind them, the chamber remained silent. The abyss was gone. The whispers had ceased. But the air carried the weight of something unfinished, something waiting, and something was following them. The corridor stretched onward, impossibly long. The deeper they went, the more the environment changed. The walls lost their rigid uniformity, warping subtly, as though reality itself was fraying at the edges. Mark tried not to think about the fact that they had lost Sam. That Carter was gone. That Jonah had been turned into something else. He had to focus on getting out. Elena was shaking. "Mark, I don't think we're in the same place anymore." Mark's grip tightened on the flashlight, though its beam barely pierced the unnatural gloom. "We don't have a choice. Keep moving." The whispering hadn't returned, but something worse had taken its place. A pulse, faint at first but growing stronger. Not sound, not movement, a heartbeat. And it wasn't coming from behind them. It was coming from inside them. Mark staggered as a wave of nausea crashed over him. His stomach clenched, his vision blurred. His veins burned. Elena let out a strangled cry, clutching her head. "It's not we didn't." She fell to her knees, retching, but what came out wasn't vomit. It was black, the same viscous, light-swallowing substance that had bled from Jonah's wounds. No, Mark stumbled back, heart hammering. He pulled up his sleeve, fingers shaking. His veins had darkened, a sickly ink spreading beneath his skin. "We have waited." The whisper returned, but this time it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from inside his own head. "Elena," his voice was barely more than a rasp. "We're infected." She wiped her mouth, eyes wide, terrified. No, we sealed it. We." She stopped. They both knew the truth. They hadn't stopped anything. They had carried it with them. Mark's pulse pounded in his ears. He looked down at his hands. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with something else. Hunger. The realization hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. It wasn't just infection. It was assimilation. The entity hadn't been trying to escape. It had been trying to spread, and now it had a head. The corridor ended at another door. But this one was different. It was human-made. Thick metal, industrial bolts, earth technology. Beyond it, a faint red light blinked. A control panel, waiting to be activated. They had found their way back. Elena hesitated. "Mark, if we leave, we can't stay." His voice was hoarse, his mind racing. We have to warn them. We have to. He faltered. Warn who? The moment they stepped outside, they would be exposing everyone. His hands curled into fists. The darkness beneath his skin had stopped spreading, but it hadn't gone away. It was waiting, watching. Elena stared at him, her expression shifting from fear to something colder. Do you feel it? Mark swallowed hard. Yes. She closed her eyes. I don't think we should go back. Mark hesitated. He wanted to deny it, to say that if they fought hard enough, if they resisted, they could contain whatever had latched onto them. But deep down, he knew the truth. The whispers weren't urging them to return. They were letting them. Mark exhaled, staring at the panel. A simple button press would open the door. Let them out. Let the world in. Elena took a slow step back. If we leave, we're dooming everyone. His hand hovered over the controls. His skin burned. His hunger deepened. Outside, the world was waiting. And the thing inside him was waiting too, smiling.